everybody. This is Steve Johann. You are on the Lion Zone, where you learn to be a lion and not the prey in a world of hungry jackals and vicious wolves. I'm your host, Steve Johann. For more about me, visit stevejohann.com. And we're going to have a little fun today because Mike, well, I'm telling you his name is Mike Williams. But anyways, Mike, for those who do not know, Mike Williams is a critical thinker and host of the popular internet site Sage of Quay Radio. He is the founder of the longtime running alternative news blog Sage of Quay News. He is an active musician, songwriter, unlike myself, who hasn't spent much time playing anything for quite a while. Mike's content is dedicated to awakening the masses to help bringing humanity back into our natural existence of living in truth and serving creation. Mike brings his audience information in alternative news, research and wellness, the esoteric, spirituality, and much more. For more about Mike, go to sageofquay.com, where he has links to all his media platforms, along with his music that you can buy. Where did you grow up?
I grew up on Long Island in New York, and I moved to New Jersey in 1983, and then I landed in North Carolina in 1994. And I'm still in North Carolina. I've been here now for 30 years, and it's home.
Whereabouts in North Carolina?
In the Raleigh area. Okay.
My family and I did a family vacation. We flew out to Charlotte, North Carolina, and then we rented a van and spent 14 days on the road and did the Midwest. And we went from there on over to Tennessee, did the Blue Ridge Mountains, and then came down and did North South Carolina and all the way through, and had a wonderful time. And North Carolina is beautiful. I live up here in Washington. It's beautiful. And Mike, I've traveled throughout most all of the United States now, road tripping. I don't care where you go. I've always said if I had to, I could live anywhere. We are blessed. And I don't think a lot of people realize how blessed we are as a country. But that's very cool. Mike, tell me a little bit about growing up. I mean, you're into music. But tell me a little bit about what was like in your day, because I think you're about my age. I'm 64. I think you're about
64.
Yeah.
I'll be 65 in January, Steve. Yeah.
Yep. So tell me a little bit about your life.
Well, born in 1959, lived in Brooklyn for 5 years, and then my parents decided to go to Long Island, and we lived on Long Island. I lived on Long Island until I started to work in the corporate world. And that was in 1982. And that's when I was working out of Manhattan. And then I was transferred over to one of our locations in New Jersey. So I lived in New Jersey for a while. Actually, I lived in New Jersey for more than a while, from around 1982, 83, around there, through 1993. So a decade. And then in 93, I took a job. It landed me in North Carolina in the Raleigh area. And I retired back in actually 2014.
Wow.
And I retired from the corporate world, I should say.
Yep.
And what I did was I went into private practice as a certified master hypnotherapist. I was board certified by the International Association of Counselors and Therapists. And I was in practice for 12 years. 4 of those 12 years overlapped with my corporate career because I knew I was going to retire. So I wanted to make sure I had a springboard, a transition, a good transition, right?
Yep.
So I didn't miss a beat, or didn't miss as many beats as I might have. And then I retired from my practice last year, September of 2022. Before we got started here, we mentioned that during the whole March 2020 event, you didn't do anything differently, and I didn't do anything differently, which means I didn't cover my face. I didn't do any of that stuff. I ran my practice as if there was no C-19.
Yep.
I just ignored it.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is, my clients came in, and I had, other than one person asking if I had taken the shot, everybody else, they came in, they had their sessions, we did the work, and that was that. It was business as usual. So if everybody had done that, or more people had done that, we might have maybe cut the runway a little shorter on that whole thing.
I agree. It's interesting you say hypnotherapist. I have a friend of mine. One of the first things I did was he had gone in, he and his partner were doing hypnotherapy, and they wanted to help people lose weight. So he knew I was doing podcasting. He said, Steve, could you help me out with creating a CD where it's that they can play it at night and help them remind them of the things they need to. So he came in, used my studio, and I found the nice calming music that went behind it. And that was like one of my first professional gigs where I recorded somebody else. And he's got a very baritone voice, and he did it. But I am very familiar with hypnotherapy in that sense. And then there was this guy that used to have his own radio show. He even started TRN, Talk Radio Network. And he was a big guy that was hypnotherapy. But Mike, just as a segue, because I didn't know this about you, what is the importance of hypnotherapy in helping people rewire their programming so they can stop doing what they're doing that's harming themselves? What are some key things there?
If we look at the mind as having a hard drive, going back to when we were younger, the files that get written to the hard drive typically take place when we're kids, and it can go back to very, very early ages. So what happens, certain events, situations, and circumstances take place, you have a reaction to it, and that reaction results in a file getting written to the hard drive. So these are our life experiences. Now, to the extent that you reuse that file, that starts to create what is referred to as habituated patterns of behavior. As an example, I'll give you a real life situation. I'll go through this quickly. I had a lady come in. She was very scared and frightened of heights, but she didn't know why. She could not recall anything in her life that took place that would result in her being fearful of high places. So what we'll do is we'll regress the client back to what is referred to as the initial sensitizing event. That's when that file first got written to the mind's hard drive. When I took her back, she was only about 2 or 3 years old. She was in a mall. She was on the second floor, the second tier of the mall. And some of these malls had like glass barriers or fencing so that you can look down at the center of the mall. She had a older brother. He was maybe 2 or 3 years older than her. She was looking through the glass, looking down on the second floor of the mall, and he pushed her into the glass. When that happened, of course, she got very, very frightened. And she was only 2 or 3. That file got written to the hard drive. So now as she progressed through life, the memory got suppressed, but the file was still there. So anytime she was in a situation where there was height, that file was being used. And the more you use that file, the bigger it grows and creates the behavior. And the behavior can become extremely dominant. It's the same thing with smoking, drinking. It's interesting, you know, I used to work with people with alcohol issues, and not many hypnotherapists would touch that area. Now, if you have alcohol addiction, hypnosis, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you have alcohol abuse, which means that you go on binge drinking types of behavior, hypnosis can be very effective. And so, you know, they call alcoholism a disease, but is it really a disease when after 2 sessions within a week, I was able to get those people with binge drinking issues to stop binge drinking. And it's the same thing with smoking and the same thing with vaping. And I worked with a lot of folks that wanted to release weight. Public speaking was another big one. Sports focus, confidence, self-esteem, and on and on. So there were many, many issues that I worked with. 50% of my practice was what I refer to as clinical hypnosis. These are the types of issues that I'm explaining. And the other half was spiritual. So I did a lot of spiritual regressions, past life regressions. I had a very successful practice. But in September of 2022, I said to my wife, we're at an age now where it's probably time for me to not be working anymore or do something else because, you know, when you think about it, Steve, we work most of our lives. Work occupies a big, big chunk of our lives. And when I was in the corporate world, I worked in the corporate world for 32 years. And when I retired, I was 55. So if you do the math, that says that 60% of my 55 years was spent in some capacity working, investing outside of me because I'm doing work for them.
Right.
Now, people can say, well, you got paid. Yeah, I got paid. But I was investing my work efforts and my creativity and my thoughts in their space to do their work, and they were reaping the benefits at the end of the day. Yes, a paycheck is a benefit, but they have to pay you. So in any case, I don't want to derail the conversation here, but that's a little history on my hypnosis and how I went from the corporate world to practicing.
Well, that's very interesting because I write a lot. I post a lot. I've written books or books on my computer. I've written newsletters, and I always talk about your mind. I always talk about things start up here, and then
Yeah.
they work down, or in their heart, and then they work up. And the Bible, I'm a big student of the Bible. I've spent my entire adult life studying and applying. And so much is all what you said. It's all about the here. It's all about understanding that when you're the two greatest commandments, love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't love God, you can't love your neighbor and you can't love yourself. If you don't love yourself, you don't love your neighbor very well. And we got a world full of people who don't have a very good connection to God, if any, and they don't have a good connection to themselves, and therefore they don't have a good connection to those around them. And we see it every day. And so I'm it's your role of what you did as a hypnotherapy expert and a therapist is important because you got people back. You got them back to those things that cause them to put that break. And I talk about that with people. I've done mentoring. I know people that go through the like a 12-step program or whatever, and I become their mentor. And I always say, so what is it that's preventing you from making that change? What? And then they go back, and then they go back, and I'm like, maybe they need to go visit Mike or someone. Cut that thing in time. Cut the time. Quit spending a year or 3 years doing this. Go have some sessions. And so that. Thank you very much, Mike. This is the Lion Zone. It's about helping people be equipped to not to be consumed by the world that we live in. And so much of our world, so much of our lives, we are consumed by things that we have no control over, or tapes that run in our head that are in the past. And Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. You have enough worries about today. And yet, Mike, you and I spend a lot of time waking up in the middle of the night. We're thinking about tomorrow. We're thinking about this. We have no control over that. We only have control over right now. And I suspect you spend a lot of time in that with your patients is helping. So I want us to bump ahead here a little bit. When did you start? I know you're big into music. When did you start getting a hold of music? When did music become a very important part of your life? I know we both grew up listening to music, but when did it get to the point where you said, I want to play, I want to create? When did that happen?
Yeah, I became very aware of music as something that really was a spark within me with the Beatles. And that goes back to, I would say, probably around 1967. So I was 8 years old. That's my recollection, because in 1968, when Yellow Submarine came out, and I've told this story a number of times, I begged my parents to take me to the movie theater to go see Yellow Submarine, because at that point, at 8 years old, I knew who the Beatles were. And my father had an old guitar. He took some adult courses to learn to play guitar at the local school, and he really didn't do much with it. But he had this guitar, and my brother and I would just strum it, and we would start playing it. And as time went on, what happened was I started to learn how to play, and I remember buying sheet music, in particular to Beatles songs, and I had no idea what the chord diagrams meant, and I had to just keep playing around until I figured it out, and I did. And I found that was the best way for me to learn, because since I knew the songs, I knew whether I was playing them right or not. Yeah. So, and I would say at around the age of 14 to 15, that's when I started getting more serious about it. My brother was a drummer, and I would play guitar. And by the time we got into our high school years, we were playing, and we spent a lot of time trying to write, at least at that point, original music. We used to play cover tunes, but we got quickly bored with that. We wanted to play original music.
Yep.
And so what happened was we connected with my friend Jeff, and Jeff was he was a very good songwriter. He was a keyboard player. And so we formed a little band, but our band didn't play out. We were really focused on writing music and recording our music because we fell for that story about the Beatles being in the studio, not having to tour, not having to do any of that. And later on, that became the same thing with Steely Dan, right? Steely Dan was all studio oriented.
Yep.
I mean, in a way, I regret it from the perspective of that we didn't get out much as far as playing. But when you go out and play, you got to play cover tunes, and we weren't doing that. We were playing and recording, writing and recording, I should say, original music. But in the end, I'm not sorry because it allowed me to really develop my ability to write music. So, and I'm still doing it today. So I'll be 65 in January, like I mentioned before. And I have no intentions of stopping my writing music or recording or releasing my tunes. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
That's very cool. I grew up listening to music. I loved music. I remember I was I, Yellow Submarine, all that. My neighbor had the album. I remember him coming and telling the other neighbor boy, they were much older than I was, and oh, the Beatles, they got the Yellow Submarine. And I remember looking at the artwork, and I was an artist, so I started drawing all the little pictures, and I drew all the pictures, and I was coloring them in. I'm making all this kind of thing. I used to make the peace sign. So I'd draw that and I'd make an American flag on it. I made little clay things like that. I'd sell them to the neighbors. I mean, I was the artist guy. So I was drawing and doing all that, and people were paying me 50 cents or 25 cents for little posters of the Beatles stuff or whatever. So I was really into that too. But it wasn't until I was watching, it was an awards ceremony, and I Know It's Only Rock and Roll. The Stones came out. They were like in this bubble or whatever it was, and the foam was coming over, and he's going, I know it's only rock and roll. And I went in my bedroom, looked in the mirror, and I started lip syncing. I go, I want to be this. And, and then of course I never did anything with that. But when I got in my early 20s, I decided, hey, why don't I take guitar lessons? So I picked up a guitar. I had an acoustic or classical I had since I was a kid. I took that over to a guitar teacher, and he goes, you probably want to get a electric. So I did. And I started taking lessons, and I took lessons for a couple of years, started learning how to read, but that was really difficult at that level. At that age, I just trying to read notes. I was doing the classical by that time. And I liked the playing, but trying to read the notes, I couldn't even tell you what the note was. I could just finger. Well, long story short, I went to a songwriting workshop somewhere along this spectrum, and it was just in our little local town, and I met another guy, and we said, hey, let's write a song together. And so I wrote the lyrics, and he did the keyboards, and we kind of entered it, and then we said, hey, why don't we do a real song? So then I had a friend that was playing a guitar, so I brought him in, and he did the vocals, and we wrote a song. We entered into the next songwriting. We ended up in the top 10. We thought, we got something here. Well, I didn't play guitar well enough, but I played, so they had a bass in the corner, and so I was playing the bass. So I said, maybe I better play bass. So I switched over, and we started writing music and playing, and we recorded. My friend had a 4-track TAC, and we did the recording, and we re-recorded our own music, and we played out. We were a Christian rock band. We played some churches. But the best places where we had a buddies that did the cover group. And they would have gigs at the local bars, and we were good friends, and they'd say, sure, you can open up for the first set. So we'd do our 45-minute set. We got off, and then they would play the rest of the night. And we didn't get paid, except for one time we played a New Year's weekend, a whole 3 or 4 days, and they go, here's some money. Whoa, we made some money. But I love playing out, and I love writing. And I was like you. We played a couple covers, but most of it was writing and the originals. And I still have all that on in digital form now. But I like Mike, I'm like you. I like the creative. I get bored playing other people's music. I want to write something. I want to create. And so I found out I was a good lyricist, and I eventually got into doing some melodies, but I was in numerous bands, got to play and got to write, and it was a wonderful time. But that's been a while. And so I'm going to shift gears, talk about when you got into doing your podcasting, and because you and I both have been doing it for a long time. When did you get into it, and when did you get on YouTube to begin with?
My work as far as conspiracy research and alternative research, I really got started publicly with my blog. And I think I first started blogging in 2011 or 2012.
Wow.
It's still going today. And in 2014, I decided that I was going to start doing podcasting. So I started on YouTube. Between 2014 and I would say 2018, I was doing a lot of podcasts. But in 2016, in late 2016, I started to really get into the Beatles research. And so what happened was more of my time and my effort was geared toward looking into the Beatles and doing that research. And I got less interested in doing the podcasting. See, one of the issues with the podcasting, Steve, and I get asked this question because people will ask, "Hey, Mike, are you going to have guests on anymore?" And I still do. I mean, I occasionally do. But I found that what happens is after a while, when you're on the other end of the microphone where you're the host and not the guest, it gets a little played out after a while. You and I spoke that when you are the host and you're basically a one-man show, there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's work in getting the guests, learning about the guests, doing the show, editing the show. There's all the post-production stuff that goes into getting a show out, managing the channel, comments, and all that stuff. I just naturally segued away from it. I just kind of transitioned out of podcasting and got into doing, for the most part, my bread and butter over the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years has been the Beatles research. But that's not to say that I won't get back into podcasting at some point. It depends. It really depends on what I feel like doing on that given day at that moment.
Well, I appreciate that, and we're gonna touch on that subject a little bit later. But people don't know that the guys and the gals you're watching online, most of them don't make any money at this thing. We do it out of a passion. We do it because we're driven. Just like we did music, we did it not because we're making money. We did it because we're driven. Some people golf. That's their passion. I like to do something where it gives back. It's just who we are. Mike's, you're the same way. But there is a lot of work, and I appreciate that. I wanted to talk about a little bit because one of the subjects I want us to cover was the role of music and movies in shaping our world, shaping our worldviews, shaping our culture in of itself. And I want to kind of start out with the movie world. Mike, I know you if you're like me, I've got a bunch of posters behind me of various movies. I bought them all those in the 90s, by the way. I got into a fad where I just bought movie posters because I love the graphics. I was at art school. I did a second career. I was hoping to get into advertising. I didn't. But long story short, I love graphics. I love imaging, and I'm an artist at heart. So when I look at movies, I look at it from entertainment, I look at from quality, and then I look at from messaging. And I never didn't think, back in the day, I used to just watch it and go, yeah, that was a great movie, blah, blah, blah. And then some movies I've watched, I don't know, 10 times because there's something about Blade Runner or The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which are two of my favorite movies, or Cool Hand Luke or whatever, something about those movies that pull me back, that I can always find something different about the movie that I didn't see the first time around. And everybody has those kind of movies. But I also, since I've gone down the rabbit hole, I really started thinking critically about what I'm watching, be it TV, be it movies, and listening to music as well. But let's talk about this for a minute. How do you think the movie industry has shaped our views on what's going on? I mean, talk to me about maybe 2 or 3 movies that come to the top of your head that you think have actually revealed some truth. And then talk about maybe some movies that have really shaped a narrative and promoted a lie, you might say. I mean, I personally think much of the war movies that we watch, I grew up, if you're like me, we're the same age. We watched a lot of TV. I used to watch movies in the afternoon, and I watch all the World War II movies. I mean, that was a big thing, and the tanks and the action and all that. And, blah, 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 blah. I didn't know until my adult years that we rounded up 120,000 Japanese Americans and put them in prison camps and held them there for 4 years and here in America and never gave them restitution. We hear about the Jews, we hear about that in Germany, but we don't hear about the Japanese.
Right.
So that's a part of our history that is kind of just wiped out, except for recently. And now they've got some. We went over and visited Minidoka over in Idaho, which is one of the former places. So it's a national monument now. But talk to us about that. How we just completely remove United States being bad at things and just showing everybody else at being bad. Anything to come to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm not a big movie watcher, I was when I was younger. Over the last 10 years, Steve, I have to be honest, I haven't paid much attention to movies at all. But if I talk in terms of,
Well, Mike, those are 90s.
no, I know.
I haven't watched. I'm with you. I don't. Other than a few times Netflix, I don't watch anything new. It doesn't even attract me. So go ahead.
Yeah. So if I look at genres of movies, where war movies, as an example, as you mentioned, the Americans are always the good guys, and everybody else, I mean, whoever we're fighting are the bad guys, and that's classic propaganda. And all of the war movies that have come out going back to way back when John, my father used to watch these John Wayne movies where he was in, war movies and stuff like that. And I would sit down with him when I would watch this stuff. All of the Westerns, especially the early ones where the Indians were portrayed as savages and barbaric. So the whole bit about Hollywood and television, it's always been about propaganda. Now, back then, I had no idea because you're watching it, and as a little kid, you're thinking, "Okay, well, that's how the Indians were." You're thinking that's how they behaved and
Yep.
all of this stuff, right? It's not until you wake up and you realize that, boy, I was just, they were just shoveling the propaganda right down my throat and jackhammering it,
Jackhammering.
right? Jackhammering it, and
Yes.
it's just stuff like that. There's movies like The Matrix. I remember when I first watched that, I had to watch it a couple of times, and then I started to understand what they were telling us. The interesting thing is with some of these movies, even Star Wars, right? Star Wars, the Death Star, and it's the Darth Vader's in black, and that whole bit right there. When you first see it, because I think that came out in 1976, and the reason why I know that is because, or 77.
And it's 77. Yep.
77, yeah, is because I worked at the movie theater at the time when it first came in, and nobody knew what it was. All I remember was that we worked at the theater. We had no idea what this film was all about. And all of a sudden, there were just hordes of people coming into the movie theater. It was the Fox movie theater on Long Island. When you first watch it, you just think it's good guys, bad guys script. And that's how you interpret it. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I've seen this.
Cowboys and Indians, black hats, white hats, that whole thing.
Yeah,
Yep.
like you've seen it, like I said, 100, probably thousands of times over. But it's not till you get older and you realize that they're actually explaining to you the dynamic of this reality, with Darth Vader and the Death Star and good overcoming evil, that there's a deeper level to it. So, it's interesting how they do this. On one hand, they are propagandizing us. On the other hand, there are movies where they're telling us how this works. And many times also we have predictive programming. As an example, that whole genre where we have, especially on television, with police, the FBI, those types of shows where they're using all kinds of technology to track down bad guys. And so that's all propaganda. That's to get you to accept and to get acclimated into a society of surveillance. They're telling you, oh, well, we need this because we need to catch all the bad guys. What they're not telling you is that, no, we're going to use it for everybody. But that's how they get you acclimated to accepting it and to portray, to take, if we take a look at the police as an example, right? If we go back, remember Adam 12?
Yes. One Adam 12. Yep.
One Adam 12. We, as a kid, used to watch Adam 12. I loved it. My father was a cop. That was a depiction of how police worked back then. And then you fast forward 50 years, 60 years, and we have the police departments all
Militarized. They've become,
Militarized. Yeah. I
yes.
mean, I saw three cops here in my town. I live in a small town just outside of Raleigh.
Yep.
And I saw them walking around today downtown. They were going into the pizzeria. And these guys had flak jackets on, anything that you can conceivably hang off a belt, they had hanging off their belt. And I thought to myself, why? You work in a town, a small town, that literally has no crime.
Yes.
No crime. So why are you dressed like that? What do you think is going to happen? So all of that is a result of the process of indoctrinating and conditioning people to accept that as police attire.
You know, it's interesting. You were talking about that, the security state. I want to play a song because, I mean, I didn't plan to, we were going to get this a little later, but let me play a song that lines exactly up with what you're talking about. Here we go. That was Judas Priest, Electric Eye.
Judas Priest, yeah. Okay, I was going to say Judas Priest. They were not a band that I actually spent a lot of time listening to growing up, but
No,
yeah.
I didn't have any of their records except for I did have that specific album. And there you go. Here's the lyrics of that. It says, "Up here in space, I'm looking down on you. My lasers trace everything you do. You think your private lives, think nothing of the kind. There is no true escape. I'm watching you all the time." And then it goes, "I'm electric spy. I'm protected electric eye. Always in focus. You can't feel my stare. I zoom into you, but you don't know I'm there." And then it was, I did a little research, and it turns out, Mike, that Electric Eye is an allusion to the book 1984 by George Orwell, in the use of the same pseudo-omniscient camera that watches over the community at all times in the dystopian form of the government. And then it reminds me of the current state of the Five Eyes country. Well, the Five Eyes country is this. The Five Eyes Alliance, abbreviated FVEY, is government document in government documents, is a cooperative intelligence network that monitors the electronic communications of citizens and foreign governments. This network is in Anglophone countries include United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The Five Eyes Alliances became the subject of the controversy in 2013 when U.S. NSA employee Edward Snowden released classified documents about its activities in public. And basically, this started, it says, back in the United States and United Kingdom, agreement in 1946. It's the world's oldest intelligence partnership. It's used to monitor everything. This has been going on, and now it's in spades.
Yeah,
we're there. We're a police state, and we're not going to get into details, but folks, Mike, I'll tell you what. My awakening, I had a wake up call the day that Trump was not. I woke up the next morning. The radio announces Trump won the election, and literally a voice said, "Turn off the radio. Turn off the news, turn off the political talk shows," because I used to be a political talk show junkie. And I did. And I said, okay, I'm listening. That's God talking to me.
Yeah.
I came to the office, turned on YouTube, was going to find some music to listen to while I did my work. And there was a little video on the right-hand side, 9/11. Well, what's this about 9/11? I haven't thought about 9/11 in years. Clicked it. Boom. I went down the rabbit hole. Never been back since. Folks, you got to do the research. 9/11 secured. That was the door finally on the hinges closed, and the security state went into action. And I said, even then, oh, the only nation before this that had guards at the airport was Israel. Now the world has become Israel.
Yeah.
Not a good thing.
No.
Not a good thing.
The Zionists have control. They control this country. More and more people have to wake up to it. I don't want to get into great detail because I know we have a lot to go into, but a lot more people are becoming aware because of the recent October 7th event that took place between Israel and Palestine, which was a false flag that Israel pulled off. But, the United States at this point in time and for a long time is a puppet state of the Zionists.
I don't think people understand the the pull and the power, and but you
Yeah.
just look at the dual citizenships that
Oh yeah.
sit on our that sit within all government bodies and within departments, which are advisors. These are dual citizens. I thought we were supposed to only have Americans sitting in those positions of power. No, we have dual citizenships. That is, I don't care what you think about Israel one way or another. You should not ever have or allow anybody who has dual alliances to
No.
sit into a leadership position with any city, state, council. It doesn't matter. You have to have an alliance to America and America's people, not some other foreign country. It's the same thing. If you wouldn't want a dual alliance with Mozambique or any other country, and yet that is what we have in our government. And you just got to do the research. You just have to look at who's involved. And we that I wasn't going to go too far into that, but you're exactly right, Mike. In the security state, they Israel was like the precursor of a security state.
Yes.
Everybody points their fingers at China at being, oh, the mod. A lot of technology has come out of Israel.
Right.
I was just listening to Chris Hedges, a big lecture he just did recently. And I mean, that guy has been on top of every single war that's been going on for the last 25 years. And he knows what's going on. He even sued Barack Obama for their misuse of drones and everything. The fact is, if you don't understand history and you don't understand what's really going on, you're captivated by the news, you're captivated by the media, you're captivated by everything that comes out of Hollywood, and you're captivated by the movies, like we just said. You'll never, yeah, it's always those bad brown people,
Right.
good white people. It's like, God, stop.
No, it's, this whole dual citizenship thing is a gigantic issue. And, I have an interview that I put up that goes back to the 1990s. And there was a lady by the name of Kay Griggs. And Kay was basically a whistleblower. Her husband was in the deep state. And it's like a 7 or 8 hour interview that she did. She did it in parts. And at that time, going back into the 1990s, she said that the U.S. State Department was completely controlled by dual citizenship Israelis.
Yep.
And we could see it in our Congress. We could see it in the Senate. If you take a look at who surrounds a president, take a look at the names, folks.
Yep.
Okay. It's not a mystery.
No.
It's a problem because we don't have an America first policy.
No, we don't. And I don't care who's running. They'll say, make America great again. And yet we saw what that guy did.
Right.
And we saw exactly what he did for 3 years. We had to suffer through the fallout of his decision making. And we're still suffering if you go down that rabbit hole. But but so many people have placed their bets, Mike, on the Mr. T. They think that he is going to be the white knight who's going to save us. And I tell people, I had a conversation, this was a couple of years ago with a friend up in Canada. He said, Steve, every government is a criminal syndicate. And I go, you're exactly right.
It's a crime syndicate.
It's a crime syndicate. You go to the Nevada, it's called the Mob Museum. And we were going all through, it's the history of organized crime. And at the end, it's got all the things they're involved with and everything. And I said, that's our government.
That's right.
It became our government. This is what, and they don't care about what you and I are. We're peons. We're not. I tell people, if you're not in their sandbox, they don't care about you. You're just a. But if you get in their sandbox, Snowden, others, that's when you get targeted and you get taken out.
Right.
And you just got to read the. Have you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
A long time ago. Yep.
Okay. As part of my long-term waking up and coming to this, I read that. And I went, oh, that's
how it works.
This is how it works. Read Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. He was sounding the alarm back in the 30s. And then read New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Read those two books, and there you will see how world politics work.
Yeah, people don't understand that there is a controlling apparatus.
Yep.
That is pulling the puppet strings. They think like guys like Trump, as an example, he's owned by them. Nobody sits in the Oval Office unless they have been selected to sit there. There
Yeah.
is no rogue element that's going to wind up in the Oval Office. It's the same thing with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Oh,
Okay. So, who has been draping himself in the Israeli flag, a total tin ear to what's going on in Palestine. And so, what? We're supposed to embrace this guy? Not me. I don't think so.
go ahead.
Also, January 6th, we talk about Trump. Just two things we have to know about Trump. One is he's the guy that hustled in Operation Warp Speed.
That's it.
Okay, there you go.
There you go.
All right, he's not off the hook for that.
Nope.
Never apologized. In fact, he still does interviews where he says it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and everybody should go out and get it. The other thing is, I did a video going back right after January 6th, Steve, where I said that Trump was part of the J6 setup, because there's no way that a president is going to show up in front of the Capitol with no plans whatsoever of security and bring thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people there. And what are you supposed to pray that something's not going to happen, especially when the government brings their agent provocateurs? So a lot of people are not going to want to hear this from me, and some of them will be spitting nails after I say this, but he was part of the J6 setup. Okay, he brought the crowd there.
Mike,
and if you or I were president and we were sitting in the Oval Office, Steve, and somebody said, "Hey, why don't you do this speech in front of the Capitol?" The first thing you and I would say, "Okay, so what are the security parameters?"
Yep.
Because I'm not showing up with no security. You guys have to take me through this to make sure there are no issues. And how dumb do you have to be to not understand that you have enemies that would plant saboteurs, agent provocateurs?
That's right.
So think about that, folks. So, and the other thing too is, just quickly on J6, I've been asked about these long prison sentences that some of these folks are getting. And what you have to understand is Washington, D.C. is a sovereign city state.
Yes, it's a District of Columbia.
District of Columbia. It's just like the Vatican. It's just like the inner city of London.
Yep.
So they're treating these people as combatants.
Yep. Enemy combatants.
And that's why they're getting the prison terms. They don't have to abide by what you think the laws are in the United States, because the District of Columbia is a sovereign city state. It would be like committing these crimes in, pick a country, North Korea.
Yep.
Doing these crimes in China. I'm just picking these. I'm not picking on these countries.
You're just
using them as examples.
Yes, exactly. Or Saudi Arabia.
Why would you think that your laws would apply in North Korea? Here's the answer. They don't.
They don't.
And so that's why this is happening. I'm convinced of it. But they play this game of charades. They don't want you to know that Washington, D.C. is its own sovereign city state. They want you to believe that Washington, D.C. is part of the Republic of the United States, which, by the way, none of the 50 states are anymore, because the entire thing is just one big corporate construct. So that's what's going on in Washington, D.C. And in my opinion, that's why these folks that basically did nothing.
They did nothing.
Ending up with 10, 12, 15 years in prison.
I produce a couple other shows, and one of the shows we've interviewed several people who are connected, who have spouses that are sitting in jail for J6. And they're pleading, and they've said, well, we've talked to our legislators, and they're all mum. And I'm like, yeah, they're part of the mechanism. They are not going to do a thing. And so what sparked what I understood that is, there's a book. I actually am going to be doing my own, I have another little short blurb that I do once a week on this show. And one of them is going to address it. But I read a book about Guantanamo Bay. And I didn't realize this. I'm reading it, and during the 9/11 situation, over the 20 years of being in, going off and bringing terror to other countries, they arrested all these individuals. The military did. They brought them to Guantanamo Bay. And because it's Guantanamo Bay, it's a military prison. Folks, military does not have to do what civilian laws say. It's a military legal system, which is completely different. So when you are an enemy combatant, supposed, you will be treated as such. You do not have no rights. You literally have no rights. You're put in a jail cell. You're tortured, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, because you're now you're a prisoner of war. You are a combatant. And I read this book, and it's interesting because, these guys have been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days, even years. And the vast majority of now have been let go because they were never guilty of anything in the first place.
Right. That's right.
And what I realized is there's a movement within, I call them the QAnon movement. And there are people who are talking about the white hats are going to rescue us, the military, and here's the documents. The military is really in control. I go, do you understand that the military is in control? The gold fringed flag is the maritime flag.
That's right. Admiralty law.
And we are under Admiralty law wherever that flag is being flown. Therefore, that's why you and I that's why the president has been, since that went in place, I can't remember if it was 1913, 1930s. Anyway, every president signs that we are under attack. They literally sign, when they go into office, they sign that we are actively in war. And that gives free carte blanche for the federal government to do whatever they want. The Constitution has been removed. And so it takes hundreds of hours of research to get this, and what I'm trying to say it within a minute's worth of time. But Mike, you know this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I did a show back in 2014 that talked about the United States being a corporation, and going back, Steve, to what I said before, you mentioned they go to their representative or their senator, they talk about these poor folks that are locked up because of January 6th. You have to understand something. I'm talking to the audience here. Congress, your Supreme Court, and your presidency reside in the sovereign city-state of Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Okay? We are under foreign occupation.
Yes.
Try to get your heads around that. And once you do, you'll understand why things that you think are supposed to work don't work.
You just nailed it. And you're going to have to do your research. Mike has done a lot more than I have. I'm on this pathway. I'm learning this. I listen to a lot of people who've been into it a long time. But I've understood that, and I'm really understand that. I want us to talk about a little about what our government has been doing. Michael, when you do your hypnotherapy, you understand the power you have. You probably had to sign some kind of oath or make some kind of declaration that you were not going to mess with a person's individuality when you went under and you helped them out. Am I correct? When you do the hypnotherapy, you took some kind of oath that said, I'm not going to harm my patients using this knowledge, because you could mess a person up.
Right. I belonged to two associations, two big ones. I mentioned one earlier, the International Association of Counselors and Therapists, who I was board certified through, and also the National Guild of Hypnotists, two very large associations here in the United States. So they have a code of conduct. And also what I do with my clients is I had them read and sign a disclosure form, what hypnosis is, what it is not. It's like anything, Steve, whether something is positive or negative depends upon the intent behind whatever it is you're doing. People will look at hypnosis and say, well, it's part of a mind control bag of tools. Well, it is. Okay, you can use it for nefarious reasons, absolutely. But it's also something that can be used for very, very positive reasons that can help people out. Whenever we learn, it's because you drop into a trance state. So when you're in school, you're very focused. Being in trance state or hypnosis just means that you have focus. You're concentrating. That's what it means. The exclusion of just about everything else that's going on around you.
It's like the zone. You get into the zone.
Get into the zone. Right. That's when clients used to come to me who were golfers, as an example. They would want to do hypnosis sessions so they get into that zone. So the only thing they're focused on when they get up to the tee, the golf club, their stance, the ball, very, very focused. So if you think about when you went to school, when the teacher was writing on the board or explaining something to you, there maybe have been 30 other kids in the class, but you weren't focused on the other 30 kids in the class. You were focused on what was taking place at the front of the class with the teacher writing on the board or explaining something to you. That is being in a trance state. You drop into an alpha state, and that's hypnosis.
So let's talk about how that was used, because I was trying to get Operation Mindcrime, which is a song by Queensryche. It's all about a man who gets a kid that gets MK Ultra'd. Let's go back for a moment. We're talking about a security state. We're talking about a government that throughout the history of our government, going way back, has not had a problem experimenting on human beings.
No. Right.
Mike, I remember as a kid, I think I was in, I might have been junior high. So this is back in the 70s. And we went down to visit a friend downtown. It was a family that we were friends with. And we went down there. My dad was interested in seeing this fella's plane. He was building his own plane in his garage, one of those kit planes. And we were there. It was kind of dark. It was in the winter. And the neighbor came over and she started talking. And this is like an older lady. And she's kind of not all there. But she would talk, ramble. I just remember certain snippets of this because I'm pretty young, but it got drilled in it got impregnated on my mind, which was, imprinted on my mind, which was, she talked about being taken away and being held and then released and put on LSD and this. And then we talked to our friend. They go, yeah, she was an MK Ultra.
She was in a program.
She was in a program.
Yeah.
And she ended up in our little town of Ferndale. Yeah.
Were her parents,
I don't know anything.
You don't know. Okay.
I'm talking, I'm a kid. I'm in the middle school.
Yeah. Okay.
And I just remember this. I mean, it's vivid. It wasn't until I'm, going through all what we're, going through the rabbit trail, checking out MK Ultra. And I went, that's what that woman had gone through.
Yep.
And they shipped people all over the world. They all over the United States. They just, okay, you went through it. Now we're going to send you off to wherever to live. And she was never, I mean, I just like, there was something wrong with her. And that was my first, I guess you might say, my first glimpse of what the world's like. And now I'm like, studied it and realized that MK Ultra, they've got books and they got movies and they got TV shows that cover it. It's not like it didn't happen. It's real. There's historical documents. Let's talk about that for a moment, about the ability to manipulate individuals to get them to do things or to find out how far you can push people, and then how the government now has used that. I think personally, they experiment on a small group to find out what they could do, and then they launch it on a large group. And so when we see, the mass hypnosis thing, you see the mass delusion. We just saw it with the 2020 event. We saw it with 9/11. Right. Why do we see something happening in front of us, and we're like, if we were really awake, we would have said, there's no way two planes could have done that. But we were just struck, we were shocked, and we were just, our lives, we were put into a shock mindset at that point. We were
trauma-based.
Thank you. Talk a little bit about that, about trauma-based programming, and then maybe you even having to, because you pulled people out of trauma. So talk about how a person could be trauma-based programming can be used and how it's being used on a mass scale.
Well, if we come at it from two different buckets, right? So before you talked about the lady who said that she was in a program. So there are those people, and there are far more people out there than most people could imagine who were in these programs or still in these programs. And many times their families have military ties and intelligence ties. So they're in programs. As an example, who would be in a program? Sirhan was in a program. He doesn't remember ever shooting Robert F. Kennedy back in 1968. He fired a gun, but his shots didn't hit Kennedy. And Kennedy was shot from behind, but he has no recollection. So he's like a Manchurian candidate. This happens all the time. So they develop these people to go out there. They wind up being the patsies. The mind control programs, which include, hypnosis is one tool in the toolbox, but you've got all kinds of trauma, which could be, it could be physical, mental, emotional trauma. You have drugs that are used, electric shock treatment, sensory deprivation. These are all different tactics that are brought in the big bag of tricks that they have in these programs. What folks should do is research and take a look at Ewan Cameron out of Canada. He was deeply, deeply into mind control, doing horrific experimentation on people. Much later on, the Canadian government came up with compensation for the families of the people that were subjected to Ewan Cameron's work, but he's just an example. And by the way, they rained all kinds of praise on him. They gave him all kinds of titles in psychiatry and all of this stuff. They made him legitimate. They will paint a picture that nothing that they're doing is nefarious.
Yep.
They're above board and all is good, when in fact, when you dig into it, all is not good. So that's one piece of it. Now, for the majority of the world population, we are constantly being bombarded with hypnosis. We're constantly being bombarded with conditioning, and most of it comes out of the media and your television set. You're being conditioned all the time.
Yep.
They're shaping your beliefs. They're shaping your morals. They're shaping your ethics. They're just changing everything. I explain to folks, look, if we go back into the 1950s, I'll pick when I was born, 1959, 1960, okay? Take a look at what was on TV. Leave it to Beaver.
Yep. Bonanza.
Okay? Right. Look at the music that we had back then. Okay? So 1962, let's put a stake in the ground. That's when the Beatles first came into play. It's not going to be a Beatles discussion, but let's just talk about 1962. That's when they started getting some traction. But take a listen to the music back then, who we were listening to. And then 7 years later, only 7 years later, there was Woodstock. Think about that transition. Leave it to Beaver. Take a look at what we were listening to, the types of music that was on the radio, the records that people were buying in the early 1960s. And then you get to stuff like Woodstock, sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yep.
That's social engineering. That is Tavistock. That's the CIA. That's the deep state. Social engineering through their social scientists, manipulating the mass consciousness and creating new realities, new lifestyles, new ways of thinking, new morals, new ethics, new beliefs. That's how it takes place. And the thing is, Steve, that it's been going on for so long now, and it's so assimilated into the mindset of the population,
Yes.
that when you try to explain to somebody that this is not the way it's supposed to be, they look at you like you're a screwball, like you're crazy.
Yes.
Oh, what are you talking about? You're just some conspirator talking, blah, 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 blah. Everything's fine. I've actually had people write that in the comments section. I don't know. Everything's good in my life. I'm like, everything's good in your life. Where are you? Obviously, you're oblivious, completely oblivious and apathetic to what's taking place in the world. You know, that's how they do it. It's just this, they constantly push it out. That's why cable news 24/7 had to become a reality in people's lives. It wasn't good enough that you would get the news at 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock at night. Remember, we used to get 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock at night.
News. Yep.
6 o'clock was an hour, 11 o'clock was a half an hour.
Yep.
Now it's 24/7. Why?
Yes.
It's to program you.
Fear.
Exactly.
Fear.
Right.
It's a in my book, Breaking the Deception Code: A True Seeker's Guide to Discernment, I talk about this. And I say the first thing you need to do is shut off your TV, shut off the news, shut off all this.
Turn it off.
Turn it off, because it is programming you. It's a mind bombing. I have a chapter called Mind Bombing, and we're being mind bombed 24/7. And Mike, it's interesting. I do watch a lot of YouTube guys like yourself. I'll watch various different individuals. And you know what came up as soon as the October 7th event took place was within days. It's all these it was a nonstop barrage of pro-Israel. I mean, one after another. And I just watched a report. Actually, it was on MTV. They've got other channels on there that said they've spent 12 million, or I don't know, a lot more than that on YouTube alone. And I went, yeah, I saw that. It's propaganda, just constantly propagandizing. You know, back in the World War II, they would put newsreels and send them back, and people would watch them in the movie theaters. Okay, but and then they would show newsreels of the Japanese being, oh, they're going to a farm and they're going to help us out. They're going to work on there, and here's their families. I mean, you can go to archives.com and you can go up and look at those newsreels of footage of the propaganda that was being put out then. So I'm going to pull it back a minute and draw the music in it for a moment. In movies. So I grew up, I watched a lot of those Bikini Beach movies. Remember all those?
Yeah.
Frankie
Avalon.
And Frankie Avalon. But that was a platform to promote sex, drugs, rock and roll, because on every one of those movies, it was bikini galore, making out behind the sand dune, And then they would showcase whatever pop artist they wanted to.
Right.
Stevie Wonder's on one of them. You've got a whole bunch of them all in there. In Hollywood, mated with the music industry, and they started manufacturing these groups. And I suspect 100% of those groups didn't even write their own music.
No.
They were just manufactured. And
yeah, it's all manufactured, Steve. It's pretty much all manufactured.
I mean, there are groups that write their own materials, like you did, I did, and I really, really, really respect those. And I mentioned Sweet. They actually played the music that was on there, but the early days they didn't write their own stuff. Somebody else wrote it for them. They played it, and then they wrote their own material later. Monkees tried to do that. Remember when they came out with their own album,
Headquarters?
Yes, and it didn't go too well. But they were trying to say something. We're tired of being owned. We're tired of playing this game. Yeah, we went on. We're just actors. Jackson 5, Osmonds. And so when you come out and say, well, the Beatles were no different, people go, no, it can't be. I had the Yellow. I watched Help. I have all these albums. I've gone to every concert. Look, I could put a cap on. I went to see Paul McCartney and Wings when he came to town in when the Kingdom was here in Seattle. Linda was still with him. It was probably a year before Linda died, and that was a kick butt concert. It was everybody played their instruments. He was up there, and then you and others reveal that this isn't actually the guy that we think he is. And then
Right.
then you keep showing these little clips of, hey Billy, how's it going? Hey Billy, how's it going? And you're like, oh, there's the talent. That's the talent. And consequently, and then you realize, and then you start looking at the song credits for when everybody broke up, George Harrison, all these, they're not writing their own material. They're not playing most of them stuff. And then it's like, why do we get so wrapped up, Michael? This is our idols. And
Right.
somebody says, no, they're just a human beings and they were playing a role, that people shut down. Let's go back to that cognitive dissonance, or that's a trauma thing. When somebody is told that what they believed is false, it wasn't that you're a bad person for believing something. Because I walk people through this in my book. I call it 12 Stages of Awareness. That you'll get angry when you come to a truth. And then you have a choice. Accept it, allow that to flow over you, and transition through the point. Finally, you come on the other side and you're calm, and it's not a big deal. But a lot of people get to that point where they're confronted with a truth. The facts are in front of them. They're looking at it and they're going, my God, if I accept this, I might have to lose my job. I might lose some friends. I might lose my position of standing.
I might be wrong.
I might be wrong.
That's a big one.
And then they go and they say, I can't do it. And then they return, they go backwards, and they become so hardened. They become the detractors. They become the trolls. They are fighting so hard.
They are the enablers of the
Yes.
agenda. They
Yeah.
become the foot soldiers of the exact thing that we're trying to eradicate, that is a cancer upon humanity. You know, what we have to understand, when I said before, it's all manufactured. It's all manufactured to various degrees. It really is based upon who is involved. So if you have real songwriters in the band, and obviously they're going to write their own songs. Depending upon how good they are as a musician, how good their chops are with their instruments, will depend upon whether they're playing on the album or not. But at the end of the day, whether you're writing your own songs or you're playing music and you're in the music industry, you're playing in their sandbox.
In their sandbox. Yep.
So, which means that the packaging and the presentation of your band, regardless, we can argue about who's writing songs and who's playing on the records till the cows come home. But if you're in the mainstream music industry, there's an agenda, and they're going to make sure that you abide by that agenda. You're not going to walk off the reservation unless you want to lose your status. So that's the thing that people have to understand, okay? So people want to debate with me on these little nuances, going back and forth, back and forth. I'm like, look, there's a much bigger picture at play that you have to understand that you're not at this point getting. And that's the point I try to get across to people. And we have to also understand that the music and entertainment business. They are a business.
They're a business.
They're there to make money. They're not there to futz around and lose money. They're there to make money. They're there to make a profit so that they can continue to perpetuate, to social engineer, and move the ball forward on behalf of those leading the charge on the New World Order, the one world government, whatever you want to call it, whatever label you want to apply to what's going on. But we also have to understand the etymology of the word entertain. The etymology of the word entertain is to keep someone in a certain frame of mind. Don't believe me? Look it up. So when you're being entertained, you're being kept in a certain frame of mind. That goes for music, that goes for movies, that goes for TV. And you have to understand all of these entities, your movie industry, your music industry, your politics, your media, your government, your military, your educational institutions.
Yep.
Are all owned by these people.
Interacted, all part of the
all
same,
integrated.
All integrated. There's nothing by accident. I in my book I quote President Ford. He said, "There's no accidents in politics."
Right.
None.
There's no right.
Zero. You think that Watergate was just no. You think anything? No. Everything is down. It's by a science. They've written this thing out. I call them, and then I talk about crisis plays. And crisis plays is that you gotta create a crisis, then you have a reaction, then you have a solution. And it comes from the Hegelian dialect. But I say, when you're writing a crisis play, you've got writers, you've got actors, you've got all the scripts, you've got everything that goes in there. And so these people write crisis plays, and they got a level. I mean, these guys that are doing this, I call them darklings. They got it for years. They've got this thing set up for years, and then they tell you a predictive programming. I point this out. You do know, and I both know, and maybe some of my listeners, because this is new for a lot of people, they don't understand that they have to tell you what they're going to do. And I call it this way. So when a builder wants to build something on a corner lot, then they put a notice of intent. They put it on a billboard. They put, I've got one across the street. There's one down the street. And what the city does is they're telling you, we have an intent that X amount of time, if you don't come in and say anything to go against it, then we have the right to do what we're going to do. So they're giving you the notice of intent of what they want to do. And then you keep going by. Next thing you know, the house is demolished and they got an apartment complex in there. Where did that come from? You didn't read the notice of intent. And these guys, they do the same thing. They throw it in media. They throw it in the back page of the newspaper, so you won't find it, but it's there. By the way, you know about radio. Every time a radio station's license is coming up for due, they have to notify you. So they're not going to notify you where you can find out about it necessarily, but it has to be in a public thing. So they'll put it someplace in the back page of a newspaper or something. Public notice. So we're back to this law, the commerce law, the merchant law. They're giving you public notice. So and then they also will leave. It's like they sign off. We did the deed. So when I was watching this, let's go back to Vegas. And I spent a lot of time watching that on YouTube and watching other things. And I thought this way, that way, this way. And I knew it wasn't the normal. And then I found a guy that was on BitChute. He's pulled his stuff off, but I connected with him. He was in Europe and he did this thing, 20 hours worth. And then I went, ooh. But I started looking. They had rolls of tape laying around on outside. Inside the room where this supposed to have been. And I looked up this, and it's gaffer's tape. And I went, do you not see it? They're letting you know this is a staged event. And then you saw some empty shoes sitting on the ground at different places around town. And I went, so I looked up empty shoes. And it turns out that this comes from a biblical situation, but it's a Masonic symbol that you hand somebody an empty shoe and it says, the job has been done. And you start seeing the empty shoes in any situation, you know that this is a staged event They carried it out. They're showing you their signature that we got it done. Mike, this is deep for a lot of people. They don't understand this. I didn't until I've spent the time, but this is how they're doing it.
Yeah. So a couple of things, right? So I tell my audience all the time, you have to understand that the people who control the world, they're occultists. So you're going to see a lot of occult symbolism, which includes numbers. A lot of people will tell me,
33.
I don't think the numbers mean anything. I'm like, well, you know what? They may not mean anything to you, but they mean a whole lot to them. And it's one of the primary ways that they communicate to each other within their inner circle. Now, when we talk about these scripts, Steve, and these staged events, anybody who did not see how easily they can coordinate an event worldwide after COVID.
Yes.
I don't understand how you cannot connect the dots.
Worldwide. Every
country,
five
every version of the FDA, every version of the CDC across the world, every politician, every town, every city had the same script. They were implementing the same exact policy, the same exact rules, and they were spewing the same rhetoric, the same propaganda. It didn't matter. Didn't matter where you were in the world. You got the same script. Now, ask yourself, how did that happen? And if you tell me it's because you believe that there was some kind of worldwide deadly virus, okay, you need to stop watching movies.
Which is another program.
You've got to take your head out of the comic book, okay?
Yes.
And so many people, they don't see it. It's like going back to Trump. How could you not understand that this is the man who introduced warp speed and brought the shot to market, brags about it, and now there is overwhelming evidence. If we take a look at what the whistleblower released in New Zealand recently, if you're not familiar with that information, you've got to get on board, because if you don't, we're going to be in this goat rodeo for a long, long time.
Okay, so speaking of goats, I've got a whole article that I'm going to post on my Substack, which is stevejohann.substack.com. And I'm not ready yet. I got to do ad because I've actually got video on it. But Judas goat,
yeah,
you know what Judas goat is?
Yeah.
So yeah, someone was a Judas goat, and let's just put it this way: he led a lot of people to the slaughter. Mm-hmm. And you're placing your faith, and I will when I get it up there, I'll post it. But people do not. I mean, look, this isn't the first time somebody has led a nation off the precipice. We saw that with Hitler. He led his nation off the precipice. We've seen it with how many of our leaders have led us off the precipice. I mean, Bush, come on, Bush, 9/11, and endless wars that got picked up by the next administration and continue it on. Endless wars. And then you sit down and you go, oh, this is like Odidinian or whatever it is. This is like the Brzezinski plan, which was 7 countries, that this was already put in place way back. And now they're enacting it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And that's all out there. You can go Google these things up. The documents are there. The government has this is the funny thing, Mike, is they've got all the documentation you want. They have to leave the documentation for you to find. When I was looking up, when I was writing my book in 2021, I looked up all the information about remdesivir. I looked it up about all the other stuff, and I'm like, it's right there. They tell you right there, it kills people. They removed it from being used, and then and it's like, who was the guy pushing that? The same guy that pushed AZT.
Yeah, it was renal failure with remdesivir, right?
Yeah, it's actually, yeah, it's your kidneys. The kidneys go out and you drowned. So then all of a sudden you're drowning, and you got your water in your lungs, and then they put they put a tube down there and try to that's a deadly combination. So I've listened to interview after interview of people who talk about their loved one going into the hospital and getting treated and never coming back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my wife's a nurse practitioner, okay? So she has treated people with flu for years and years and years, and it's a simple little process. There's not much you have to do. But, oh no, all of a sudden, they weren't doing that process anymore. They were doing this new process.
And they were getting compensated for it, Steve. They were being incentivized to do it. Yes.
Tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. That's wrong right there.
And here's
I just want to say one thing, though. We talked about, Germany and Hitler. my take on that is there's two sides to every story, and I'll just leave it at that. So,
Oh no, no,
um,
I have gone down a little bit of that track,
yep,
and I do believe, I personally believe that Germany was targeted two different times: World War One, World War Two. E. Michael Jones has talked about this. Other people have talked about it. They've done a great job. So I'm not. I'm. There is so much more there, folks, that you need to do some
a
digging.
lot more.
And if you want to talk about prison camps and people dying, you need to look at, as I understand, and I haven't done as deep as I should. Eisenhower oversaw the death camps of German soldiers.
The Rhine Meadow camps.
That's right. That's where people were not given food, and
that was after the war was over.
After the war was over. I want people to pick up a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It was written in the 60s, pre all the hullabaloo that we hear all the time. It was written in the 60s. It was a guy who did live, who spent time in 2 or 3 German prison camps, and he lived through it. He talks about it, and he created a thing called logotherapy, which was about how to have hope when you don't have hope. In his book, Michael, he said, I could see somebody, and you'll get this because you're you're an enlightened guy. He said, when a person decided they didn't have hope and they didn't have a reason to live, they would all of a sudden get sick, and then within a week they'd be dead.
Yeah, it's like willing yourself to death.
He did not say that they died in some extraordinary torture chambers or any of that. He said that the vast majority died of typhus, and it was because they had lost hope. And it's like when you read this pre-politicized, you go, wow. And I've applied that. And I want to kind of segue. Let's talk about just a few minutes, because we're going to run out of time here. I want us to talk about the power of the mind. And I want us to talk about when, the Lion Zone is dedicated to helping people be lions and not the prey. So we got this world order. But Michael, I've got a pretty good life. I'm doing wonderful things. I'm not allowing those people to control my life. I have unplugged from their offers. And I think this is a big one, and you probably understand this. A lot of this stuff is offers. All the way through the 2020 and the last 3 years, they were offers. No one came to your door. No one came to my door, put a gun to my head and said, you have to do this. We were told, this is what we want you to do. And people just went with it. There was no legal action, by the way. No laws were passed. These are mandates, they're not laws.
Right.
They're dictates, and they're not actually laws. And let's talk about the power of the mind. We've talked about how people can twist that. Talk about how you, within your family, your network of friends, have said, I'm going to use my mind to do good, to connect to God, to connect to our spirit, and to connect to our family, and to be a good in this world instead of the bad. Be an answer, be a solution. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, the first thing we have to understand is that this world, this reality, one of its primary intents is to separate you from the Creator, from God, from Source, from the divine. It has to do that in order for it to have control. And the first thing you have to understand is that there is evil in the world. And I was asked once, a long time ago, why is it that good has so much difficulty overcoming evil? And I said, that's because evil knows no boundaries. In order to overcome that, what we have to do is we have to make that connection back to God, back to Source, back to the Creator.
Yes.
That is what gives you the strength to have the bigger picture and to break outside of this paradigm that they want to keep us in. They want to keep us in a box, a containment center.
Yes.
And they've done everything they possibly can to tell you that this is your reality. There's nothing outside that box. There's nothing outside it. There's nothing above it. And by the way, your box is like a room with no doors.
Yes.
You're stuck here. You're just stuck here. And so
you lone fish swimming in a fish bowl year after year.
Yeah, you just got to do what we tell you to do. And if you follow our rules and you obey, everything's going to be okay.
We'll keep feeding you.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Even that's becoming questionable now. So what I've done, and thank God my wife is just like us, Steve. Is she's a
Mine
free
too.
thinker, and she's
Yep.
thank God.
Me too.
I had people write me during the whole COVID thing saying that my wife is not on board, or the other way around. It's causing all kinds of conflict in our marriage, our relationship, separation, divorce. These are all things that were on the table that people were talking because of this, and that's a perfect example of how these entities operate.
Yes.
They want to drive that wedge in your life. Okay. So what you've got to do is number one, we spoke about before, turn that TV set off and start to become aware of what is really going on in the world and how the world really works. I knew Jordan Maxwell. Jordan and I did a number of shows together. We spoke off the podcast a number of times. And Jordan would always say, and you've heard him say this on many, many shows, if people knew how the world really works. And that's what people have to start to understand. And how do you do that? Well, like I said, turn the TV set off and then start listening to shows like Steve's, like mine. There's so many others out there. Start plugging yourself into alternative research. Yeah, not all of it is going to be straight up and good. Okay. So there's a whole process of discernment. Now, God gave you the gift of intellect and reasoning, right? A brain.
Yes.
So that means that you have to start thinking for yourself. You have to be a free thinker. You have to be a critical thinker. And yes, it's a process. It takes discipline to start vetting through all this stuff and figuring out what resonates with you and what doesn't. Hey, there's going to be things that's happened to all of us that maybe you latched onto in the beginning, and then later on you're like, yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
Yes.
Right. So, then you move off that and you continue your progress forward. And I mentioned to Steve before the show that the way I look at this and the way I treat my life, my wife, and my family is this is an individual journey. This is about soul development. This is what this is all about.
Yep.
What is your soul learning in this reality? It's learning what is it like to be separated and detached from source, from God, and from the creator. Do you like it? Does it feel good? Does it do you any good? No, it doesn't. It absolutely does not.
No.
And so you've got to come back. You really,
Yes.
really do have to come back and understand that you are a divine being. You are a
Yep.
divine presence.
The Bible says we are made in God's image. He has his fingerprint on every one of us. It's just some people run away. But he's got, we're made in his image. Take that in, folks.
They're all about taking God out of the picture. I mean, listen to Yuval Harari running around saying that they are achieving godlike status. That is their goal. And that goes back to, without getting into it, that goes back into the teachings of Aleister Crowley and Thelema.
Yes. Yes.
Every man and woman is a star. There is no God other than man. Those are the tenets in which they live by. They are looking to replace God with them. They're going to be the gods.
Big God, big government, big G for government, small G for God.
Yeah, I mean, and they're telling us that. Like I said, Yuval Harari is saying that, they are achieving godlike status with all of their technology and their transhumanism and all of the other nonsense that they're putting out there. So you have to take a step back, folks. And there's also a natural order to life. There's a man and there's a woman.
Amen.
Okay? Period. There are two genders. Period. And up until a few years ago, that was not debatable because, God forbid, we should actually go back to biology and use that as our foundation. That's how it really is. So, so we have, what we have to do is, for people who buy into all that stuff, you've been brainwashed. You have been conditioned to accept nonsense, right? Even when we talk about the COVID thing, we're moving at the speed of science. And people are like, yeah, we're moving at the speed of science. What does that even mean? Do you even ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that mean? It's nonsense. And people are embracing it. So the point is that you have to start critically thinking. You have to start getting a grip on what it is that life is really all about. And it's not about kowtowing and obeying a bunch of overlords.
That's right.
It's not about that. Really, if everybody was inspired enough and they had the wherewithal to apply their intellect and their reasoning and to be educated and and to explore and to discover. You know, Steve, we probably wouldn't even need a government. People
Yeah.
would operate in a sovereign way, but that's a long way off.
Well,
Because
I'm gonna just interject here for a moment. If when you read the scriptures, you read the Old Testament, which I do, and you realize that God said, "I want to be the God over the nation of Israel." He wants to be the God over everybody, but he said, "I'm just going to put judges." So originally, it was just judges. Here's the laws, and here's a judge, Moses, and then other judges, and that's all there is. The judges are just like, here's the law, live by this. If you break it, go before the judge. He's going to work it out, and then I'll be God. And then the people complained and said, "We want kings." God says, "Okay, and this is what you're going to get." And you know what he said? You're going to be enslaved. You're going to have to be doing military. You're going to pay taxes. It's going to break your back. Blah, 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 blah. He says, you're going to have it. That's what government is. When we're on the other side, God is in charge. We're not going to have government, and we're going to be in paradise. But I believe, Mike, that we could have paradise here. I've traveled the United States. I've traveled to other places around the world. It's beautiful. I don't care where you go. Why don't we have super highways that go down to South America and people traveling and people making making enough to live on and interacting? And why is this constantly people going, I got to have more and I'm going to kill somebody to have more? And I mean, like, well, that's the darkness.
it's separation. The system is completely upside down.
Yeah.
You look at the pyramid structure, it's them at the top and it's the people at the bottom.
Yep.
And all of the weight of that pyramid is on the backs of the people, right? It's the feudal system. The feudal system never left.
No.
It's just a lot more advanced. There's technology. There's just a lot more really fine-tuned propaganda to make you believe that you're free, that you have free choice. You don't have free choice, and you're not free if you're going to invest and believe in their system, because their system doesn't allow that. It doesn't want that.
No, and when you had, and I believe the Son of God came, Jesus, and people said he wasn't political. I go, his whole sermons were against the Sanhedrin, which was his government. Pharisees, Sadducees, and the priests, the scribes. That was the government. And he called them devils. He called them sons of the devil. He called them whitewashed sepulchres. He called them evil. He just said, you're going to be wiped out. By the way, they did in 70 AD. But he was saying, this is not my Father's will. This is not God's will. Blessed are the meek and blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who, and it's like, well, that's the opposite of blessed are the warmongers. Blessed are the haters. Blessed are those greedy. His Sermon on the Mount, it's like every religion put into one, the best of. And it's like, can't we just practice that? The world would be paradise if we just practiced that little, about 100 words. That's all. It's simple. And you're right. So it comes back to what you were saying. Most people are separated. They are either psychically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally separated from Source, from the Almighty. And it leaves us open then for what I call demonic to control us. Yeah. And the guys at the top, they are 100% under that influence because it's the opposite. They want to hate, steal, and murder. And that's their vernacular. And lie, by the way, lie.
They lie all the time. And really, folks, we have to get back to the Creator, Source, God, whatever your inclinations are, your belief system is, because they pulled you away from it. When you're believing in their system and you feel like you're bound by their system, what they've done is they've removed your soul from your body. Your soul is supposed to have its hands on the steering wheel of your vehicle. Your vehicle is who you are. It's your body. It's your, right? Your mind.
Yep.
That you're supposed to be steering your ship or your car.
Yep.
So what they did was they peeled your hands off the steering wheel and they stuck you in the trunk. And it's like, now you don't know where you're going. They're going to tell you where to go. They're going to drive the car. And then when they get there, they'll take you out of the trunk. And you're going to be like, well, how did I get there? I was in the trunk. I don't know. Don't worry about it. You're not supposed to know. You are where we need you and want you to be.
Yes.
It goes back to their 15-minute cities.
Yep.
Agenda 21, Agenda 2030,
electric
all that
cars.
stuff. we're going to tell you what to do, when to do it. We're going to tell you everything, where to live, how far you can travel from your house, how many pieces of clothing. This is the 15-minute city nonsense. How many pieces of clothing can you have? How many trips can you take outside of your little box on any given year? I mean, this stuff sounds absolutely insane, and it is insane. But all you need to do is go onto the World Economic Forum's website, and you can see that these lunatics are publishing this stuff.
And what's interesting, Michael, is when you travel, you realize that's not a reality.
No,
that's their reality. They're trying to tell you. And I live in a little community where people have we have a Tesla dealership, and everybody runs around. And I'm like, have you done research to know that somebody was showing a graph, 12,000 gallons worth of diesel fuel have to be burned up in order to make one car?
Right. Well, people don't understand that petroleum is in the manufacturing process for just about everything.
It's in everything. And the idea that petroleum's bad, we are, the planet is, the earth is full of carbon. It is what it is. And so again, I just say, well, I'm not buying an electric car. When I rented a van and I traveled 3,500 miles in 14 days, I could never have done that in an electric vehicle. I could fill up anytime we wanted. We keep going. And the idea that you're going to electrify the whole world, that's ridiculous. You could never even. So, Michael, what I found, and maybe you've done the thing, is I just don't accept their offers. And you know what? My life's a lot better. And those who don't go along with the offers, their lives are better. We've both have seen, I have people close to me who are still so trapped. Their minds are warped now from the COVID situation.
Yep.
They believed it. They went along with it. And now their minds are warped.
Right.
They are literally warped. They become like hypochondriacs. They can't, they don't want to engage. And we're talking 3 years later.
That's trauma-based mind control.
Trauma-based mind control.
Yep. Now they're paying the price for it. And they don't even realize that's the thing with mind control. That becomes your way of thinking, your way of operating. Remember, I was talking about that file gets written to the hard drive, and then the more you use it, the larger it becomes, and then it becomes your dominant behavior. That's what's happened to them.
Yes.
So they've been infected with a mind parasite.
Yes.
That's a mind pathogen.
A mind pathogen. I love that term. A mind pathogen.
So they're infected with that, and now this is how they think and operate. I see them all the time. Even, because you and I are in the business of alternative research and taking a look at what the garbage that they're putting out, and then commenting on it. But as soon as they come out with there's this new variant it's exploding out in, Zimbabwe or something. Yeah. And as soon as they say that, and it goes on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, as soon as you step outside, there are people in the supermarket masked up, and I'm thinking, what is wrong with you? I know what's wrong with them. It's a rhetorical question, but it's gotten to the point where I feel bad for them.
I do. I just look at them as victims. I just look at them as trauma victims, and I have no place to speak into their lives. The people I know wouldn't want me to speak into their lives, so I don't speak into their lives. When I see somebody in my office complex walking around with something on their face, I'm like, I don't say anything. I literally, I was telling people early on in the whole situation, I said, Jesus says, don't cast your pearl before swine. And basically that's saying that pigs don't understand the value of pearls. And people who are locked into a mindset do not understand truth because they can't. They literally cannot understand what you have to tell them. So why even, you can drop some tidbits, drop some seeds, and if they're not even open, then you just don't even go that direction anymore. And that's brought me throughout my life. That's one way I cope with people who are deeply entrenched in things that, some of my best friends still think Trump's going to be the one that's going to save them. And I'm like, and I keep saying, dude, that he did Operation Warp Speed. Yeah, I know, but who else I go, that's it. Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter who's in there. It's going to be the same outcome. That's
what they don't understand. We didn't get to this point because one party was different than the other. They both had to march toward the same objective, but they used different tactics and approaches to get there. So for people who think that, you've been clowned, okay? And you're continuing to be clowned. thinking that anybody who sits in that White House is going to be any different or is going to push a different agenda. Trump has bosses.
Yes, it does.
Biden, we clearly know because this is a man that has dementia and wears a
Dementia.
diaper. Okay, so
Yeah.
he's not running anything. That's the other thing. Look, if you're in the conspiracy research arena, alternative research, please, please stop saying Biden did this and Biden did that.
No, he doesn't do anything.
He's not doing anything.
Nothing.
Instead of saying things like that, invest more time and look at who's actually running things. Senior Executive Services. I'll leave it at that. Go look it up. Senior Executive Services. These are basically lifetime appointees, virtually unfireable, who are running the government.
When Eisenhower, one of the good things he said was, and did was when he left, was he said, beware of, and he actually extended it, was the industrial, congressional, scientific, industrial, military complex.
Right.
Well, you can add technology to that. You can add media to that.
Yeah.
They're all one and the same. They all work lockstep together. They do it. The good news is in the world of movie making, TV making, in independent, there is a number of people that are saying, nope, we're breaking free. We are making our own content, whether it's documentaries, whether it's you and I doing these things, whether it's people making movies. And then they go out and they do it the old fashioned way, just like somebody had their own records. They would put them in the back of their car. They'd go out and they would go do concerts and stuff like that and sell them at their concerts. People are doing that with their movies and with their documentaries. They're traveling and they build this network. Owen Benjamin, I mean, he got locked out of all these different locations, and because he had enough followers, when he wanted to tour, they said, hey, we'll put you up in a barn, we'll put you in an airport, we'll put you in a home, whatever. And there's other people who've done the same thing. They travel and they go, well, I interviewed John Schneider. This is back in 2021, the height of the can't go anywhere, and he's like us. He's a thinker. And I said, so what are you doing? And he goes, well, I just finished off my movie. We recorded on my ranch, and we had all the actors out there and did all our stuff. And now we're promoting it. We're going to drive-in movies, and we're having a concert before it. And we're going out to all the drive-in movie theaters all over wherever. And they were doing a tour. He didn't stop. And
Right.
and then he releases it on his own platform. So he owns the platform. And that's what we have to do. It's good that we're on Rumble or BitChutes and stuff, but if you can have a way of, you sell your own music. Do you, by the way, and we're going to get wrapped up here. I want to kind of wrap it back to you. Where can people find your music, and do you create it? You record it? Do you control the distribution of it?
Yeah. So going back to, but before I get there, Steve, what Owen's doing and these other guys, it's called being resilient.
Being resilient.
They're moving forward. As far as the music goes, I write all my own music, record it here. I have a 24-track Tascam digital recorder to my right. And my publisher is TuneCore, which is great because most of what I sell comes to me, not to the publisher. They get a cut, obviously, because they have to do the distribution.
Yep.
So that's pretty much how it works. If you go to my website, sageofquay.com, you'll see the links to everything. It's to my YouTube channels, my Rumble, my BitChute, my Odyssey, my Brighteon, my music website. I'm on SoundCloud, Reverb Nation, Bandcamp, SoundClick. These are all music platforms. And you can take a listen to my music. I recently released my third album back in May of this year. And I just released 2 compilation albums. One is called A Decade of Rockers, 2013 through 2023. And the other one is A Decade of Blues and Ballads.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah. And if you go to my website, you'll find those albums and you can take a listen. So, music is a big part of my life, and I do it for the love of it. Is there any money in it? No, not really, because of streaming. They destroyed that as well.
Maybe the next show we'll talk about all the aliases of all the actors and the musicians out there that had to hide their real identities out there. But Mike, it's been wonderful having you on the show, and thanks for coming on with me. Don't forget to subscribe to this show and share with your friends so I can grow it. So until next time, this is Steve Johann saying, be a lion and not the prey.